Welcome, Wapham crew and new listeners. Secure your tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the rocky tops of the La Platas on a rocky mountain high, get sucked into the vortex of the Four Corners, and settle down snugly at mile marker 420 in colorful Colorado. It is Sunday, December 11th, Monday, December 12th, for those of you across the pond and beyond. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, and welcome to We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. I am your host, TessaTNT, and we are broadcasting live from the Mile High Clubhouse tonight. I'm so glad you could join us this evening. I hope you had an awesome and a rockin' weekend so far. Thank you so much for joining us on one of our many outlets. If you're listening live, you may be listening to us right now on KPNL Radio, which you can find on KPNL Radio at kpnl-db.com. If you'd like, you can also check us out on eTalk Radio, which you can find on etalk.tv/radio. There's a lot of other awesome shows over there. So many talented people sharing, their ideals and things they've learned in this world so far. So it's a pretty awesome place to be. You may also find us on your free time, whether you're working it, or working out, under We Are Paradox Media at Spreaker, Twitter, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Facebook, Castbox, Tumblr, SoundCloud, TuneIn Radio, Deezer, Podcast Addict, Podcast Chaser, and Podvine. Still working on the Amazon. If you don't mind, just mosey on over to our YouTube channel, We Are Paradox Media. Please subscribe, like any show you've listened to, and please leave us any comments that, may pertain to the show. Did you like it? Did you not? Especially future guests that you'd like us to get on here. We'll try our damnedest to get it going. So tonight we were supposed to have Jay and Marie Yates on, but I haven't heard from them. No foul, holiday seasons are pretty crazy and hectic, so hopefully we can reschedule that for January. That would be great. I would like that. I would like it a lot. They're a really awesome couple. I really enjoy hanging out with them on the air. It's been over a year since we've had them on the show, but they are an epic paranormal couple, and yeah, they're doing a lot of good things down there in Arizona. Bisbee, Arizona. If you're ever there, make sure you swing by and check them out. So tonight, instead of having Jay and Marie Yates on, we will be having story time with me, your epic host, TessaTNT. Since I'm reading, I'm not doing a live video as far as like, hey, you can see me. You got a picture here of the coyote. Not coyote, it's actually a fox from Rico, where we were working on a mine up there and had some paranormal activity, basically supernatural, so far as Bigfoot being there and rearing his beautiful furry head, throwing rocks, scaring the hell out of my friend. Poor Johnny. He was totally freaked out about, the Bigfoot throwing the rocks and just being up there on that site at night. He's very superstitious and pretty funny guy. All right, so the story we will be starting with is The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And it says Dr. Jekyll is an ordinary man struggling with the evil in his own soul, an evil unleashed in the form of the hideous and murderous Mr. Hyde. And Robert Louis Stevenson, who wrote this book, had lived from 1850 to 1894. Or was a writer during that time? I don't know, because that's only 44 years, but life and existence was a bit different back then. It says he was born and educated in Edinburgh, Scotland. Despite a lifetime of ill health, he was a prolific writer of fiction, essays, and poetry. His first published work appeared in student magazines while he was at university. Apart from the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, his best known work today is the adventure classic Treasure Island. I haven't read it, but I really want to, so we'll check it out. We'll check it out sometime in the future, perhaps, when summertime hits. So I'm going to leave a comment over here in Spreaker really quick. We're all over the place. We have so many different chat rooms. It's really hard to keep up, but hey, we're doing it. We're doing it to it. Last night we had Mr. Steve Stockton on. He's amazing. I love him. He's got several awesome shows. I was just listening to some of his stories yesterday that he's reading for, and I don't know. He's just got that epic voice that could read anything. You know, the Quaker Oats guy, Wilford Brumley, talking about diabetes. Well, Steve Stockton's way better than that feller. So I'm going to pull up our background music. This one is called The Creeper. Is it not picking up? Let me see. Okay, it's picking up. That's good. Slowing the volume a smidge. Trying to create an ambiance for our story time. Henry Jekyll's full statement of the case. I was born in the year 18 so no real date there, to a large fortune, endowed besides with excellent parts, inclined by nature to industry, fond of the respect of the wise and good among my fellow men, and thus, as might have been supposed, with every guarantee of an honorable and distinguished future. And, indeed, the worst of my faults was a certain impatient gaiety of disposition, such as had made the happiness of many, but such as I found it hard to conceal with my imperious desire to carry my head high, and wear a more than commonly grave countenance before the public. Hence it came about that I concealed my pleasures, and that, when I reached years of reflection, and began to look around me, and take stock of my progress and position in the world, I stood, already committed to a profound duplicity of life. Many a man would have even blazoned such irregularities as I was guilty of. But, from the high views that I had set before me, I regarded and hid them with an almost morbid sense of shame. It was thus rather the exacting nature of my aspirations than any particular degradation in my faults that made me what I was, and, with even a deeper trench than in the majority of men, severed in me those provinces of good and ill which divide and compound man's dual nature. In this case, I was driven to reflect deeply and invertebrately on that hard law of life which lies at the root of religion, and is one of the most plentiful springs of distress. Though so profound a double dealer, I was in no sense a hypocrite. Both sides of me were in dead earnest. I was no more myself when I laid aside restraint and plunged in shame than when I labored, in the eye of day, at the furtherance of knowledge or the relief of my scientific studies, which led wholly towards the mystic and transcendental, reacted and shed a strong light on this consciousness of the perennial war among my members. With every day, and from both sides of my intelligence, the moral and the intellectual, I thus drew steadily nearer to that truth by whose partial discovery I have been doomed to such a dreadful shipwreck. The man is not truly one, but two. I say two, because the state of my own knowledge does not pass beyond that point. Others will follow. Others will outstrip me on the same lines, and I hazard the guess that man will be ultimately known for a mere polity of multifarious, incongruous, and independent denizens. I, for my part, from the nature of my life, advanced infallibly in one direction, and in one direction only. It was on the morale and in my own person that I learned to recognize the thorough and primitive duality of men. I saw that, of the two natures that contended in the field of my consciousness, even if I could rightly be said to be either, it was only because I was radically both. And from an early date, even before the course of my scientific discoveries had begun to suggest the most naked possibility of such a miracle, I had learned to dwell with pleasure as a beloved daydream on the thought of the separation of these elements, if each, I told myself, could but be housed in separate identities. Life would be relieved of all that was unbearable. The unjust might go his way, delivered from the aspirations and remorse of his more upright twin. The just could walk steadfastly in security on his upward path, doing the good things in which he found his pleasure, and no longer exposed to disgrace and penitence by the hands of this extraneous evil. It was the curse of mankind that these incongruous faggots were thus bound together, that in the agonized wound of consciousness these polar twins should be continuously struggling. How, then, were they disassociated? I was so far in my reflections when, as I have said, a side light began to shine upon the subject from the laboratory table. I began to perceive more deeply than it has ever yet been stated, and trembling in materiality, the mist-like transience of this seemingly so solid body in which we walk retired. Certain guests I have found have the power to shake and to pluck back the fleshly vestment, which, as a wing, might toss curtains of a pavilion. For two good reasons, I will not enter deeply into this scientific branch of my confession. First, because I have been made to learn the doom and burthen of my life is bound forever on man's shoulders. And when the mistake is made to cast it off, it but returns upon us with more unfamiliar and more awful pressure. Second, because, as my narrative will make, alas, too evident my discoveries were incomplete. Enough, then, that I not only recognized my natural body from the mere aura and effulgence of certain of the powers that made up my spirit, but managed to compound a drug by which these powers should be dethroned from their supremacy, and a second form, incontinence, substituted, none the less natural to me because they were the expression, and bore the stamp of lower elements in my soul. I hesitated long before I put this theory to the rest of practice. I knew well that I risked death, for any drug that was potently controlled and shook the very fortress of identity might be the least scruple of an overdose, or at the least opportunity in the moment of exhibition, utterly blot out that immaterial turbulence which I looked to it to change. But the temptation of a discovery so singular and profound at last overcame the suggestions of alarm. I had long since prepared my tincture. I purchased at once from a firm of wholesale chemists a large quantity of particular salt, which I knew from my experiments to be the last ingredient required, and Late one accursed night, I compounded the elements, watched them boil and smoke together in the glass, and when the ebullition had subsided, with a strong glow of courage, drank off the potion. The most racking pangs succeeded. A grinding in the bones, deadly nausea, and a horror of the spirit that could not be exceeded at the hour of birth or death. These agonies began swiftly to subside, and I came to myself as if out of a great sickness. There was something strange in my sensations, something indescribably new, and, from its very novelty, incredibly sweet. I felt younger, lighter, happier in body. Within, I was conscious of a heady recklessness, a current of disordered sensual images running like a milk breeze in my fancy, a solution of the bonds of obligation, an unknown but not an innocent freedom of the soul. I knew myself at the first breath of this new life to be more wicked, tenfold more wicked, sold a slave to my original evil, and the thought in that moment braced and delighted me like wine. I stretched out my hands, exulting in the freshness of these sensations, and in the act I was suddenly aware that I had lost stature. There was no mirror at that date in my room. That which stands beside me as I write was brought there later on, and for the very purpose of those transformations. The night, however, was far gone into the morning. The morning, black as it was nearly ripe for the conception of the day. The inmates of my house were locked in the most rigorous hours of slumber, and I determined, flushed as I was with hope and triumph, to venture in my new shape as far as to my bedroom. I crossed the yard wherein the constellations looked down upon me. I could have thought, with wonder, the first creature of that sort, that their unsleeping vigilance had yet disclosed to them. I stole through the corridors, a stranger in my own house. On coming to my room, I saw for the first time the appearance of Edward Hyde. I must here speak by theory alone, saving not that which I know, but that which I suppose to be the most probable. The evil side of my nature, to which I had now transferred the stamping efficacy, was less robust and less developed than the good 9/10 of life, of effort, virtue, and control. It had been much less exercised and so much smaller, slighter, and younger than Henry Jekyll. Even as good shone upon the countenance of the one, evil was written broadly and plainly on the face of the other. Evil, besides, which I must still believe to be the lethal side of man, had left on that body an imprint of deformity and decay. And yet, when I looked upon that ugly idol in the glass, I was conscious of no repugnance, rather a leap of welcome. This, too, was myself. It seemed natural and human. In my eyes, it bore a livelier image of the spirit. It seemed more express and single than the imperfect and divided countenance I had been hitherto accustomed to call mine. And in so far I was doubly right. I have observed that when I wore the semblance of Edward Hyde, none could come near to me at first without a visible misgiving of the flesh. This, as I take it, was because all human beings, as we meet them, are commonly commingled out of good and evil. And Edward Hyde alone, in the ranks of mankind was pure evil. I lingered but a moment at that mirror. The second and convulsive experiment had yet to be attempted. It yet remained to be seen if I had lost my identity beyond the redemption and must flee before daylight from a house that was no longer mine. And hurrying back to my cabinet, I once more prepared and drank the cup, once more suffered the pangs of dissolution, and came to myself once more with the character, the stature, and the face of Henry Jekyll. That night I had come to the fatal crossroads. Had I approached my discovery in a more noble spirit? Had I risked the experiment while under the empire of generous and pious aspirations? All must have been otherwise, and from these agonies of death and birth I had come forth an angel instead of a fiend. The drug had no discriminating action. It was neither diabolical nor divine. It did but shook the doors of the prison house of my disposition, and, like the captives of Philippi, that which stood within ran forth. At that time my virtue slumbered, my evil kept awake my ambition, was alert and swift to seize the occasion, and the thing that was projected was Edward Hyde. Hence, although I had now two characters as well as two appearances, one was wholly evil, and the other was still old Henry Jekyll, that incongruous compound, of whose reformation and improvement I had already learned to despair. The movement was thus wholly toward the worst. Even at that time, I had not yet conquered my aversion to the dryness of a life of study. I would still be merrily disposed at times, and as my pleasures were, to say the least, undignified, and I was not only well known and highly considered, but growing towards the elderly man. This incoherency of my life was daily growing more unwelcome. It was on this side that my new power tempted me until I fell in slavery. I had but to drink the cup, to doff at once the body of the noted professor, and to assume, like a thick cloak, that of Edward Hyde. I smiled at the notion. It seemed to me at the time to be humorous, and I made my preparations with the most studious care. I took and furnished that house in Soho to which Hyde was tracked by police, and engaged as a housekeeper a creature whom I well knew to be silent and unscrupulous. On the other side, I announced to my servants that a Mr. Hyde, whom I described, was to have full liberty and power about my house in the square, and, to parry mishaps, I even called and made myself a familiar object in my second character. I next drew up that will to which you so much objected, so that if anything befell me in the person of Dr. Jekyll, I could enter on that of Edward Hyde without pecuniary loss. And thus fortified, as I supposed, on every side, I began to profit by the strange immunities of my position. Men have before hired bravos to transcend their crimes, while their own person and reputations sat under shelter. I was the first that ever did so for his pleasures. I was the first that could thus plod in the public eye with a load of genial respectability, and in a moment, like a schoolboy, strip off these lendings and spring headlong into the sea of liberty. But for me, in my impenetrable mantle, the safety was complete. Think of it. I did not even exist. Let me but escape into my laboratory door. Give me but a second or two to mix and swallow the draught that I had always standing ready, and whatever he had done, Edward Hyde would pass away like the stain of breath upon a mirror, and there, in his stead, quietly at home, trimming midnight lamp in his study, a man who could afford to laugh at suspicion would be Henry Jekyll. Pleasures which I made haste to seek in my disguise were, as I have said, undignified. I would scarce use a harder term, but in the hands of Edward Hyde they soon began to turn towards the monstrous. When I would come back from these excursions, I was often plunged into a kind of wonder at my vicarious depravity. This familiar that I called out of my own soul and sent forth alone to do his good pleasure was a being inherently malign and villainous. His every act and thought centered on self, drinking pleasure with bestial avidity from any degree of torture to another. Relentless like a man of stone, Henry Jekyll stood at times aghast before the acts of Edward Hyde. But the situation was apart from ordinary laws, and insidiously relaxed the grasp of conscience. It was Hyde, after all, and Hyde alone, that was guilty. Jekyll was no worse. He woke again to his good qualities, seemingly unimpaired. He would even make haste, where it was possible, to undo the evil done by Hyde, and thus his conscience slumbered. Into the details of the infamy at which I thus connived, for even now I can scarce grant that I committed it, I've no design of entering. I mean but to point out the warnings that the successive states with which my chastisement approached. I met with one accident which, as it brought on no consequence, I shall no more than mention. An act of cruelty to a child aroused against me the anger of a passer-by, whom I recognized the other day in person of your kinsman. The doctor and the child's family joined him. There were moments when I feared for my life, and at last, in order to pacify their too just resentment, Edward Hyde had to bring them to the door and pay them in a check drawn in the name of Henry Jekyll. This danger was easily eliminated from the future by opening an account at another bank in the name of Edward Hyde himself, and when, by sloping my own hand backwards, I had supplied my double with a signature, I thought I sat beyond the reach of fate. Some 2 months before the murder of Sir Danvers, I had been out for one of my adventures, had returned at a late hour, and woke the next day in bed with somewhat odd sensations. It was in vain I looked about me, in vain I saw decent furniture and tall proportions of my room in the square. In vain did I recognize the pattern of the bed curtains and the design of the mahogany frame. Something still kept insisting that I was not where I was, that I had not wakened where I seemed to be. But in the little room in Soho, where I was accustomed to sleep in the body of Edward Hyde, I smiled to myself and, in my psychological way, began lazily to inquire into the elements of this illusion, occasionally, even as I did so, dropping back into a comfortable morning doze. I was still so engaged when, in one of my more wakeful moments, my eye fell upon my hand. Now the hand of Henry Jekyll, as you often remark, was professional in shape and size. It was large, firm, white, and comely, but the hand, which I now saw clearly enough in the yellow light of the mid-London morning, lying half shut on the bedclothes, was lean, corded, knuckly, of the dusky parlor, and thickly shaded with a swart growth of hair. It was the hand of Edward Hyde. I must have stared upon it for near half a minute, sunk as I was in the mere stupidity of wonder, before terror woke up in my breast as sudden and startling as the crash of cymbals. And bounding from my bed, I rushed to the mirror. At the sight that met my eyes, my blood was changed into something exquisitely thin and icy. Yes, I had gone to bed Henry Jekyll. I had awakened Edward Hyde. How was this to be explained? I asked myself, and then, with another bound of terror, how was it to be remedied? It was well on in the morning, the servants were up, all my drugs were in the cabinet. The long journey down 2 pair of stairs, through the back passage, across the open court, and through the anatomical theater, from where I was then standing horror-struck. It might indeed be possible to cover my face, but what of use was that, when I was unable to conceal the alteration in my stature? And then, with an overpowering sweetness of relief, came back upon my mind that the servants were already used to the coming and going of my second self. I had soon dressed, as well as I was able in clothes of my own size, had soon passed through the house where Bradshaw stared and drew back at seeing Dr. Hyde at such an hour and in such a strange array, and 10 minutes later Dr. Jekyll had returned to his own shape and was sitting down with a darkened brow to make a feint of breakfast. Small indeed was my appetite. This inexplicable incident, this reversal of my previous experience seemed, like the Babylonian finger on the wall, to be spelling out the letters of my judgment, and I began to reflect more seriously than ever before on the issues and possibilities of my double existence. That part of me, which I had the power of projecting, had lately been much exercised and nourished. It had seemed to me of late as though the body of Edward Hyde had grown in stature, as though, when I wore that form, I were conscious of a more generous tide of blood, and I began to spy a danger that, if this were much prolonged, the balance of my nature might be permanently overthrown, the power of voluntary change be forfeited, and the character of Edward Hyde become irrevocably mine. The power of the drug that had not been always equally displayed. Once, very early in my career, it had totally felt me. Since then, I had been obliged on more than one occasion to double, and once, with infinite risk of death, to treble the amount. And these rare uncertainties had cast hitherto the sole shadow in my contentment. Now, however, and in the light of that morning's accident, I was led to remark that whereas in the beginning the difficulty had been to throw off the body of Jekyll, it had of late gradually but decidedly transformed itself to the other side. All things, therefore, seemed to point to this, that I was slowly losing hold of my original and better self, and becoming slowly incorporated with my second and worse. Between these two, I now felt I had to choose. My two natures had memory in common, but all other faculties were most unequally shared between them. Jekyll, who was composite, now with the most sensitive apprehensions, now with a greedy gusto, projected and shared in the pleasures and adventures of Hyde. Hyde was indifferent to Jekyll, or but remembered him as the mountain bandit remembers the cavern in which he conceals himself from pursuit. Jekyll had more than a father's interest. Hyde had more than a son's indifference. Cast in my lot with Jekyll was to die to those appetites which I had long secretly indulged, and had of late begun to pamper. To Cast it in with Hyde was to die to 1,000 interests in apparitions, and to become, at a blow, and forever despised and friendless. The bargain might appear unequal, but there was still another consideration in the scales. For while Jekyll would suffer smartingly in the fires of abstinence, Hyde would be not even conscious of all that he had lost. Strange as my circumstances were, the terms of this debate as old and commonplace as man, much the same inducements and alarms debate are as old and cast the die for any tempted and trembling sinner. And it fell out with me, as it falls with so vast a majority of my fellows, that I chose the better part and was found wanting in the strength to keep it. Yes, I preferred the elderly and discontented doctor, surrounded by friends and cherished honest hopes, and bade a resolute farewell to the liberty and comparative youth, the light step, leaping pulses, and secret pleasures that I had enjoyed in the disguise of Hyde. I made this choice, perhaps with some unconscious reservation, for I neither gave up the house in Soho, nor destroyed the clothes of Edward Hyde, which still lay ready in my cabinet. For 2 months, however, I was true to my determination. For 2 months I led a life of such severity as I had never before attained to, and enjoyed the compensations of an approving conscience. Time began at last to obliterate the freshness of my alarm. The praises of conscience began to grow into a thing of course. I began to be tortured with throes and longings, as of Hyde struggling after freedom, and at last, in an hour of moral weakness, I once again compounded and swallowed the transforming draught. I did not suppose that when a drunkard reasons with himself upon his vice, he is once out of 500 times affected by the dangers he runs through, his brutal physical insensibility. Neither had I, long as I had considered my position, made enough allowance for the complete moral insensibility and insensate readiness to evil which were the leading characters of Edward Hyde. Yet it was by these that I was punished. My devil had been long caged. He came out roaring. I was conscious, even when I took the draught, of a more unbridled, a more furious propensity to ill. It must have been this, I suppose, that stirred in my soul the tempest of impatience with which I listened to the civilities of my unhappy victim. I declare, at least before God, no man morally sane could have been guilty of that crime upon his pitiful provocation, and that I struck in no more reasonable spirit than that in which a sick child may break a plaything. But I had voluntarily stripped myself of all those balancing instincts by which even the worst of us continues to walk with some degree of steadiness among temptations. In my case, to be tempted, however slightly, was to fall. Hello, Jason. Hello, Sandra. Instantly, the spirit of hell awoke in me and raged. With a transport of glee, I mauled the unresisting body, tasting delight from every blow, and it was not till weariness had begun to succeed that I was suddenly, in the top fit of my delirium, struck through the heart by a cold thrill of terror. A mist dispersed. I saw my life to be forfeit, and fled from the scene of these excesses, at once glorying and trembling, my lust of evil gratified and stimulated, my love of life screwed to the topmost peg. I ran to the house in Soho, and, to make assurance doubly sure, destroyed my papers. Thence I set out through the lamp-lit streets, in the same divided ecstasy of mind, gloating on my crime, lightheadedly devising others in the future, and yet still hastening and still hearkening in my wake for the steps of the Avenger. Hyde had a song upon his lips as he compounded the draught, and as he drank, it pledged the dead man. The pangs of transformation had not done tearing him before Henry Jekyll, with streaming tears of gratitude and remorse, had fallen upon his knees and lifted his clasped hands to God. The veil of self-indulgence was rent from the head to foot. I saw my life as a whole. I followed it up from days of childhood, when I had walked with my father's hand, and through the self-denying toils of my professional life, to arrive again and again, with the same sense of unreality, the damned horrors of the evening. I could have screamed aloud. I sought with tears and prayers to smother down the crowd of hideous images and sounds with which my memory swarmed against me, and still, between the petitions, the ugly face of my iniquity succeeded by the sense of joy. The problem of my conduct was solved. Hyde was thenceforth impossible, whether I would or not. I was now confined to the better part of my existence, and, oh, how I rejoiced to think it! With what willing humility I embraced anew the restrictions of natural life! With what sincere renunciation I locked the door by which I had so often gone and come, and ground the key under my heel. The next day came the news that the murder had been overlooked, that the guilt of Hyde was patent to the world, and that the victim was a man high in public estimation. It was not only a crime, it had been a tragic folly. I think I was glad to know it. I think I was glad to have my better impulses thus buttressed and guarded by the terrors of the scaffold. Jekyll was now my city of refuge. Let but Hyde peep an instant, and the hands of all men would be raised to take and slay him. I resolved in my future conduct to redeem the past, and I can say with honesty that my resolve was fruitful of some good. You know yourself how earnestly, and then so strong in my soul that it almost rivaled the brightness of hope. I was stepping leisurely across the court after breakfast, drinking the chill of the air with pleasure, when I was seized again with those indescribable sensations that heralded the change, and I had but the time to gain the shelter of my cabinet, before I was once again tagging and freezing with the passions of Hyde. It took on this occasion a double dose to recall me to myself, and alas, 6 hours after, as I sat looking sadly in the fire, the pangs returned, and the drug had to be re-administered. In short, from that day forth, it seemed only by a great effort as the gymnastics, and only under the immediate stimulation of the drug, that I was able to wear the countenance of Jekyll. At all hours of the day and night I would be taken with the premonitory shudder. Above all, if I slept or even dozed for a moment in my chair, it was always as Hyde that I awakened. Under the strain of this continually impending doom, and by the sleeplessness to which I now condemned myself, even beyond that, I had thought possible to man, I became, in my own person, creature eaten up and emptied by fever, languidly weak both in body and mind, and solely occupied by one thought: the horror of my other self. But when I slept, or when the virtue of the medicine wore off, I would leap almost without transition, and the pangs of transformation grew daily less marked, into the possession of a fancy brimming with images of horror, terror, a soul boiling with causeless hatreds, and a body that seemed not strong enough to contain the raging energies of life. The powers of Hyde seemed to have grown with sickliness of Jekyll, and certainly The hate that now divided them was equal on each side. With Jekyll, it was a thing of vital instinct. He had now seen the full deformity of that creature that shared with him some of the phenomena of consciousness, and was co-heir with him to death. And beyond these links of community, which in themselves made the most poignant part of his distress, he thought was the shocking thing, that the slime of the pit seemed to utter cries and voices, that the amorphous dust gesticulated and sinned, that what was dead and had no shape should usurp the offices of life. And this again, that insurgent horror was knit to him closer than a wife, closer than an eye, lay caged in his flesh, where he heard it mutter and felt it struggle to be born, and at every hour of weakness, and in the confidence of slumber, rebelled against him, and deposed him out of life. The hatred of Hyde for Jekyll was of a different order. His terror of the gallows drove him continually to commit temporary suicide, and returned to his subordinate station of a part instead of a person. But he loathed the necessity, he loathed the despondency himself regarded. Despondency in which Jekyll was now fallen, and he resented the dislike with which he was himself regarded. Hence the ape-like tricks he would play me, scrawling in my own hand blasphemies on the pages of my books, burning the letters and destroying the portrait of my father. And indeed, had it not been for his fear of death, he would long ago have ruined himself in order to involve me in the ruin. But his love of life is wonderful. I go further. I, who sicken and freeze at the mere thought of him, when I recall the abjugation and passion of this attachment, and when I know how he fears my power to cut him off by suicide, I find it in my heart to pity him. It is useless, and the time awfully fails me to prolong this description. No one has ever suffered such torments. Let that suffice. And yet even to these habit brought no, not elevation, but a certain callousness of soul, a certain acquiescence of despair, and my punishment might have gone on for years but for the last calamity which has now fallen, and which has finally severed me from my own face and nature. My provision of the salt, which had never been renewed since the date of the first experiment, began to run low. I sent out for a fresh supply and mixed the draught. The ebullition followed, and the first change of color, not the second. I drank it, and it was without efficiency. You will learn from Poole how I have had London ransacked. It was in vain, and I am now persuaded that my first supply was impure, and that it was that unknown impurity which lent efficacy to the drop. About a week has passed, and I am now finishing this statement under the influence of the last of the old powders. This, then, is the last time, short of a miracle, that Henry Jekyll can think his own thoughts or see his own face, now how sadly altered in the glass. Nor must I delay too long to bring my writing to an end, for if my narrative has hitherto escaped destruction, it has been by a combination of great prudence and great good luck. Should the throes of change take me in the act of writing it, Hyde will tear it in pieces. But if some time shall have elapsed, after I have laid it by, his wonderful selflessness and selfishness in circumscription to the moment will probably save it once again from the action of his ape-like spite. And indeed the doom that is closing on us both has already changed and crushed him. Half an hour from now, when I shall again and forever renew that hated personality, I know how I shall sit shuddering and weeping in my chair, or continue with the most strained and fear-struck ecstasy of listening, to pace up and down this room, my last earthly refuge, and give ear to every sound of menace. Will Hyde die upon the scaffold, or will he find the courage to release himself at the last moment? God knows. I am careless. This is my true hour of death, and what is to follow concerns another than myself. Here, then, as I lay down the pen and proceed to seal up my confession, I bring the life of that unhappy Henry Jekyll to an end. Well, that's it for the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We are actually going to go to our first music break. On this break, we have Miss Michaelan Hay from Ontario, Canada, with Nothing But Blood, Collapse, Close, Devil You Know, and then we have Mr. Fred Johnson III from Canyon County, California, with Sugar. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this music break.
There's too much sky, too blue, too white. The birds on the wire are singing, but I don't know why. Why aren't the roses hanging their heads? They're standing straight up, blooming instead. Now that we're apart, there's nothing but blood in my heart. Why does that guy have a smile on his face? Why is the sun even shining today? Why are the headlines talking about love? Don't they all know what happened to us? Now that we're apart, there's nothing but blood in my heart. The moon goes up, the sun goes down, the stars light up, the world goes round. Every day, life moves on, it don't stop for anyone. The moon goes up, the sun goes down, the stars light up, the world goes round. Every day, life moves on, it don't stop for anyone. Now that we're apart, there's nothing. Now that we're apart, there's nothing but blood in my heart. Blood in my heart. Blood in my heart. guess. Yeah, we're gonna crash. How is this gonna last when we always collapse? Yeah, we're going too fast. Get your foot off the gas. Yeah, we're gonna crash. How is this gonna last when we always collapse? When we always collapse. Oh, I can see the end begin. When we always collapse. Oh, I can see the end begin. Saw you for the first time in a while. You seemed so surprised I worked out a smile. 'Cause I've grown and I've changed. Yeah, we went separate ways. How come we're both back here? 'Cause you pushed me away, had my life rearranged, but still we're both back here. Close to me, I want you close to me. I can see that you wanted me. Follow me, baby, just follow me. Trust me, baby, get close to me. You know how to make me lose all control. I should know when I need to let myself go. So let's go. Close to me, I want you close to me. I can see that you wanted me. Follow me, baby, just follow me. Trust me, baby, get close to me. I'm not the same. I'm not the same. I'm not the same person anymore. I'm not the same. I'm not the same. I'm not the same. I want you close to me. I want you close to me. I can see that you wanted me. Follow me, baby, just follow me. Trust me, baby, get close to me. I want you close to me. I can see that you wanted me. Follow me, baby, just follow me. Trust me, baby, get close to me. Your troubled heart bleeds like a river. It's rushing towards fields painted greener. It doesn't see the demons behind, praying you're getting close to the line, so they can get their hands on love and trade it off for silver. The curtain's nice, but what it hides is worse than sticks and stones. Better the devil, you know. Better the devil, you know. Better the devil, you know. Better the devil, you know.
Waiting here on this cold, lonely night without you. The tension's overbearing. Wondering, are you coming back home again? To inspire fondness with love. Where did our love go wrong? My sugar. Why did I make you cry? Whispers flow through my mind when I think about you. That warm feeling in me. My heart sings a sad song and just melts away. Please look into my eyes, my sugar. There's life in out there. Until the sun doesn't shine anymore, I'll be there. When time is a memory, I'll know this love. You will always be the one, my sugar. The feeling is so strong. Waiting here on this cold, lonely night without you. Where did our love go wrong, my sugar?
Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining us this evening on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. We just finished up with The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Now we're continuing on to a new book. This book is known as Real Hauntings, True American Ghost Stories by Hans Holzer. On the back it says, "What beckoning ghost along the moonlight shade invites me steps and points to yonder glade?" That's by Mr. Alexander Pope. So on the inner cover of this lovely book, Hans Holzer's Real Hauntings continues his account of true, authenticated case histories of hauntings throughout the United States. From the restless shade of a sea captain on Cape Cod The remorseful perisher at St. Mark's in New York was unable to forget her extramarital affair with the little girl ghost of Lansdowne, Pennsylvania, who can't quite understand what happened to her world. Real Hauntings chronicles the fascinating and dramatic accounts of the true experiences that ordinary people have had with the world beyond our own. New Hampshire, Virginia, California, Louisiana, Minnesota. Ghostly encounters can occur anywhere and to anyone. Among the many remarkable encounters in Real Hauntings is the story about the ghost of a young girl killed during the wild party in Hollywood. The testimony of tenants at an 18th century carriage house in New York's Hell's Kitchen regarding the several ghosts they have encountered in the account of the piano-playing phantom in an old house in Arkansas. In all 25 true witness accounts are reported here by Dr. Hans Holzer. Hans Holzer is the author of 118 books, including Hans Holzer's Haunted America, America's Mysterious Places, and Life Beyond. Educated at Columbia University, New York, and Vienna University in Austria, and holding a PhD from the London College of Applied Science, Professor Holzer taught parapsychology for 8 years at the New York Institute of Technology. He lectures widely and makes his home in New York. Continue through the pages of the book. It's gonna be epic. Let me turn this music down over here on Spreaker really quick. For some reason, I don't think it's coming through on Facebook, but it's all good. If you guys want to hear musical background to these stories, feel free to mosey on over to Spreaker. It should also be on YouTube, but it's hard to say. What the hell is happening? So this was published in 1995. Here is our introduction. What exactly is a ghost? Great American ghost stories dealt with the famous of the past historical hauntings that I was able to verify and report on. However, there are hundreds of thousands of hauntings all over America involving neither the famous nor great moments in history. These ghostly encounters are experienced by people in all walks of life, and they are just as meaningful as a haunting in the White House. Those who have read Great American Ghost Stories and Hans Holzer's Haunted America will find these additional accounts equally absorbing and thought-provoking. It can happen to anyone. Ghosts are, after all, people who had unfinished business on their minds when they passed on. In Real Hauntings, America's True Ghost Stories, I have selected cases from many areas of America that seem to be particularly interesting and also convincing, so that those who need persuading will see that life does go on beyond the veil. When you look through the following pages, you need to forget a popular notion about ghosts, that ghosts are dangerous, frightening, and evil. Nothing could be further from the truth. Ghosts are also not figments of the imagination or the product of a motion picture writers. Ghostly experiences are neither supernatural or unnatural. Instead, they fit into the general pattern of the universe we live in. Even though the majority of conventional scientists have not yet understood exactly what ghosts are, those who have studied parapsychology have come to understand that human life does continue beyond that of which we commonly call death. Once in a while, there are extraordinary circumstances when death occurs, and these exceptional situations create what we popularly call ghosts and haunted houses. Ever since the dawn of mankind, people have believed in ghosts. The fear of the unknown, the certainty that there is something somewhere out there, bigger than life, beyond its pale, and more powerful than anything walking the earth, has persisted throughout the ages. These fears had their origins in primitive people's thinking. To them, there were good and evil forces at work in nature, both ruled over by supernatural beings, and to some degree capable of being influenced by the attitudes and prayers of humans. The fear of death was, of course, one of the strongest human emotions. It still is. Then what are ghosts, if indeed there are such things? To the materialist and the professional skeptic, that is to say, people who do not wish to be disturbed in their belief that death is the end of life as we know it, the notion of ghosts is unacceptable. No matter how much evidence is presented for the reality of the phenomenon, they will argue against it and describe it to any several natural causes. Either delusion or hallucination must be the explanation, or perhaps a mirage, if not outright trickery on the part of parties unknown. Entire professional groups who deal in the manufacture of illusions have taken it upon themselves to label anything that defies their ability to reproduce it artificially through trickery or manipulation as false or non-existent. Especially among photographers and magicians, the notion that ghosts exist has never been a popular one. However, authentic reports of psychic phenomenon along ghostly lines keep coming into reputable report centers such as the various societies or psychic research, or to people like me who are parapsychologists. Granted that even though a certain number of these reports may be due to inaccurate reporting, self-delusion, or other errors of fact, there still remains an impressive number of cases that cannot be explained by any other means than that of extrasensory perception. What exactly is a ghost? In terms of psychic research, as I have defined it, a ghost appears to be a surviving emotional memory of someone who has died traumatically, and usually tragically, but is unaware of his or her death. Ghosts, then, in the overwhelming majority, do not realize that they have died. Those who do know they are dead are confused as to where they are and why they do not feel quite as they used to feel. When death occurs unexpectedly or unacceptably, or when a person has become very attached to a place he or she has lived in for a very long time, sudden, unexpected death may come as a shock. Unwilling to part with the physical world, such human personalities then continue to stay on in the very spot where their tragedy or their emotional attachment had existed prior to physical death. Ghosts do not travel. I don't agree with that one. They do not follow people home. I don't agree with that one either. Nor do they appear in more than one place. You can be omnipresent. Nevertheless, there are also reliable reports of the apparitions of the dead having indeed traveled and appeared to several people in various locations. Those, however, are not ghosts in the sense that I understand the term. They are free spirits, or discarnate entities, who are inhabiting what Dr. Joseph B. Ryan of Duke University has called the world of the mind. They may be attracted for emotional reasons to one or another place at a given moment, in order to communicate with someone on the earthly plane. But a true ghost is unable to make such moves freely. Ghosts, by their very nature, are not unlike psychotics in the flesh. They are quite unable to understand fully their own predicament. They are kept in place, both in time and space, by their emotional ties to the spot. Nothing can pry them loose from it so long as they are reliving over and over again in their minds the events leading to their unhappy deaths. Sometimes this is difficult for the ghost, as he or she may be too strongly attached to feelings of guilt or revenge to let go. Eventually, though, a combination of informative remarks by a parapsychologist and suggestions to call upon the deceased person's family will pry the ghost loose and send him or her out into a free spirit world. Ghosts have never harmed anyone except through fear found within the witness. The harm results from the witness's own doing because of his or her ignorance as to what ghosts represent. In the few cases where ghosts have attacked people of flesh and blood, such as the ghostly abbot of Trondheim, it is simply a matter of mistaken identity, where extreme violence at the time of death has left a strong residue of memory in the individual ghosts. By and large, it is entirely safe to be a ghost hunter or to become a witness to phenomenon of this kind. In his chapter on ghosts in Man, Myth, and Magic, Douglas Hill examines all alternate hypotheses, one by one. Having done so, he states, "None of these explanations is wholly satisfactory, for none seems explicable to the whole range of ghost lore." Try as they might, people can't explain away ghosts, nor will ghosts simply disappear. They continue to appear frequently all over the world, to young and old, rich and poor, in old houses and new, in airports and streets, and wherever tragedy strikes. For ghosts are indeed nothing more or nothing less than a human being trapped by special circumstances in this world while already being in the next, or, to put it another way, ghosts are human beings whose spirits are unable to leave the earthly surroundings because of unfinished business or emotional entanglements. But even if you do not encounter ghosts or have a psychic experience in the houses described here, you will find them fascinating places. As an adventure in historical research, haunted houses have no equal. Finally, I would suggest to my readers not to argue the existence or non-existence of ghosts in haunted houses. Everyone must find his or her own explanations for what she experiences, and belief has nothing to do with it. Belief is the uncritical acceptance of something you cannot prove one way or another, and the evidence for ghosts and hauntings is so overwhelming, so large, so well documented, that arguing the existence of the evidence would be a foolish thing indeed. While there may be various explanations for what people experience in haunted houses, no explanation will ever be sufficient to negate the experiences themselves. Thus, if you are one of the many humans who enter a house that is haunted and have a genuine experience in it, be assured that you are perfectly normal. You're a perfectly normal human being who uses a natural gift that is neither harmful nor dangerous. Professor Hans Holzer, PhD, New York City, July 1994. Here we go. Part 1. Ghosts in New England. 1. A ghost in New Hampshire. When I speak of Plymouth, I'm not talking about the Plymouth where the Pilgrims landed. This Plymouth is located in New Hampshire, in a part of the state that is rather lonely and sparsely settled even today. If you really want to get away from it all, whatever it may be, this is a pretty good bet. I mention this because living in this rural area isn't likely to give you much choice in the way of entertainment, unless of course you provide it yourself. But I am getting ahead of myself and my story. I was first contacted about this case in August 1966, when a young lady named Judith Elliott, who lived at the time in Bridgeport, Connecticut, informed me of the going-ons in her cousin's country house, located in New Hampshire. Judith asked if I would be interested in contacting Mrs. Chester Fuller regarding these matters. What intrigued me about the report was not the usual array of footfalls, presences, and the house cat staring at someone unseen, but the fact that Mrs. Fuller apparently had seen a ghost and identified him from a book commemorating the bicentennial of the town of Plymouth. When I wrote back, rather enthusiastically, Miss Elliott forwarded my letter to her cousin, requesting more detailed and chronological information. But it was not until well into the following year that I finally got around to making plans for a visit. The medium, Ethel Johnson Myers, and my ex-wife Catherine, always interested in spooky houses since she used to illustrate some of my books, accompanied me. Mrs. Fuller, true to my request, supplied me with all that she knew of the phenomena themselves, who experienced them, and such information about former owners of the house and the house itself as she could garner. Here, in her own words, is that report, which of course I kept from the medium at all times so as not to influence her or give her prior knowledge of house circumstances. Mrs. Fuller's report is as follows. The house is located at 38 Merrill Street in the town of Plymouth, New Hampshire. To reach the house, you leave the thruway 93 at the first exit for Plymouth. When you reach the set of lights on Main Street, turn right and proceed until you reach the blue Sunoco service station, and then take a sharp left onto Merrill Street. The house is the only one with a white picket snow fence out front. It has white siding with a red front door and a red window box, and it is on the right-hand side of the street. 1. The first time was around the middle of June, about a month after moving in. It was the time of day when lights are needed inside, but it is still light outside. This instance was in the kitchen and bathroom. The bathroom and dining room are an addition onto the kitchen. The doors to both rooms go out of the kitchen beside each other, with just a small wall space in between. At that time, we had our kitchen table in that space. I was getting supper, trying to put the food on the table, and keep 2 small children ages 2 and 5 off the table. As I put the potatoes on the table, I swung around from the sink toward the bathroom door. I thought I saw someone in the bathroom. I looked and saw a man. He was standing about halfway down the length of the room. He was wearing a brown plaid shirt, dark trousers with suspenders, and he wore glasses with round metal frames. He was of medium height, a little on the short side, not fat and not thin, but a good build. A roundish face, and he was smiling. Suddenly, he was gone. No disappearing act or anything fancy, just gone, as he had come. Footsteps. And this is number 2. There are footsteps in other parts of the house. If I am upstairs, the footsteps are downstairs. If I am in the kitchen, they're in the living room, etc. These were scattered all through the year, in all seasons, and in the daytime. It was usually around 2 or 3, and always on a sunny day, as I recall. 3. Winter, late at night. Twice we, Seth and I, heard a door shutting upstairs. Seth is an elderly man who stays with us now. When we first moved here, he was not staying with us. His wife was a distant cousin to my father. I got acquainted with them when I was in high school. I spent a lot of time at their house, and his wife and I became quite close. She died 11 years ago, and since then, Seth has stayed at his son's house, a rooming house, and now up here. He spent a lot of time visiting us before he moved in. Only one door in the bedrooms upstairs works right now, and that is the door to my bedroom. Checked the kids that night to see if they were up or awake, but they had not moved. My husband was also sound asleep. The door was already shut, as my husband had shut it tight when he went to bed to keep out the sound of the television. The sound of the door was very distinct. The sound of when it first made contact, then the latch clicking in place, and then the thud as it came in contact with the casing. Anything that was or could be loose and have blown or banged or anything that could have fallen down was checked out. Nothing had moved. The door only shut once during that night, but it happened again later or in the winter. Four. The next appearance was in the fall. I was pregnant at the time. I lost the baby on the 1st of November, and this happened around the 1st of October. Becky Sue, my youngest daughter, was 3 at the time. She was asleep in her crib, as it was around midnight or later. I was asleep in my bedroom across the hall. I woke up and heard her saying, "Mommy, what are you doing in my bedroom?" I kept saying that until I thought I'd better answer her, or she would begin to be frightened. I started to say, "I'm not in your room." As I did, I started to turn over and saw what seemed to be a woman in a long white nightgown in front of my bedroom door. In a flash, it was gone out into the hall. All this time, Becky had been saying, "Mommy, what are you doing in my room?" as the image appeared out of nowhere in the hallway. Becky changed her question to, "Mommy, what were you doing in my bedroom?" Then I thought that if I told her I wasn't in her room, she would really be scared. All this time, I thought that it was Kimberly, my older daughter, getting up, and I kept waiting for her to speak to me. Becky was still sounding like a broken record with her questions. Finally, I heard, "It. Take 2 steps down, turn a corner, and take 3 steps more." Then I went into Becky's room and told her that I'd forgotten what I had gone into her room for, and to lie down and go to sleep, which she did. All this time, Kim had not moved. The next morning, I was telling Seth, who was living with us now, about it, and I remembered about the footsteps going downstairs. I wondered if Becky had heard them too, so I called her out into the kitchen and asked her where I went after I left her room. She looked at me as if I had lost my mind and said, "Downstairs." Duh. This was in the winter, around 2. Seth was helping me make the beds upstairs. They had been skipped for some reason. We heard footsteps in from the playroom across the kitchen and a short way into the hall. We both thought it was Becky Sue, who was playing outdoors. She comes in quite frequently for little odds and ends. Still, no one spoke. We waited for a while, expecting her to call to me. Finally, when she did not call, I went downstairs to see what she wanted, and there was no one there. I thought that maybe she had gone back down and out, but there was no snow on the floor or tracks of any kind. This was also on a very sunny day. Number 6. This was also late at night. 1965, around 11. was putting my husband's lunch up when there was a step right behind me. That scared me, although I do not know why. Up until that time, I'd never had any fear. Maybe it was because it was right behind my back. And the others had always been at a distance or at least in front of me. Cannot remember anything happening since then. Lately, there have been noises as if someone was in the room, or the kitchen, or dining room while I was in the living room, but I cannot be sure of that. It sounds as if something was swishing, but I cannot definitely say that it is not the sounds of an old house. The story of the house and its previous owners is very hard to get. We bought the house from Mrs. Ora Jack. Her husband had bought it from their son, who had moved to Florida. The husband was going to do quite a bit of remodeling and then sell it. When he died, Mrs. Jack rented it out for a year and then sold it. Mrs. Jack's son bought it from a man who used to have a donut shop and did his cooking in a back room, so I've been told. There was a fire in the back that was supposedly started from the fat. They bought the house from Mrs. Emma Thompson, who, with her husband, had received the house for caring for a Mr. Woodbury Langdon, and by also giving him a small sum of money. Mrs. Thompson always gave people the impression that she was really a countess, and that she had a sister in Pennsylvania who would not have anything to do with her because of her odd ways. For shame, oh father. Mrs. Thompson moved to Rumney, where she contracted pneumonia about 6 months later and died. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson moved in to take care of Mrs. Woodbury Langdon after he kicked out Mr. and Mrs. Dinsmore. Mr. Cushing gave me the following information. He lives next door and has lived there since 1914 or 1918. He was awakened by a bright flash very early in the morning. Soon he could see that the top room, which was the tower room, was all afire. He got dressed, called the firemen, and ran over to help. He looked in the window of what is now our dining room, but was then Mr. Langdon's bedroom. Mr. Langdon was not able to go up and down the stairs because of his age. He pounded on the window, trying to wake Mr. Langdon up. Through the window he could see Mr. and Mrs. Dinsmore standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the bedroom. They were laughing, and Mr. Dinsmore had an oil can in his hand. All this time, Mr. Langdon was sound asleep. Mr. Cushing got angry and began pounding harder and harder. Just as he began to open the window, Mr. Langdon woke up, and Mr. Cushing helped him out the window. He said that no one would believe his story, even the insurance company. Evidently, Mr. Langwood did, because soon after he kicked the Dinsmores out and Mr. and Mrs. Thompson came to take care of him, around 1927, he came down with pneumonia. He had that for 2 days, then he went outdoors without putting on any jacket or sweater. Mrs. Thompson ran out and brought him back in. She put him back in bed and warmed him up with coffee and wrapped him in wool blankets. He seemed better until around midnight. Then he began moaning. He kept it up until around 3 when he died. Mr. Langdon was married twice. His first wife and his 18-year-old son died of typhoid fever. He had the wells examined and found that it came from them. He convinced his father to invest his money in putting in the first waterworks for the town of Plymouth. At that time, he lived across the town on Russell Street. He later married a woman by the name of Donna. He worshipped her and did everything he could to please her. He remodeled the house. That was when he added on the bathroom and bedroom dining room. He also built the tower room so that his wife could look out over the town. He also had a big estate over at Squam Lake that he poured out money on. All this time, she was running around with anyone she could find. Mr. Cushing believes that he knew it deep down but refused to let himself believe it. She died, Mr. Cushing said, from the things she got, from the things she did. He insists that it was called leprosy. In the medical encyclopedia, it reads under leprosy. Differential diag. Tuberculosis and especially syphilis are the two diseases most likely to be considered. She died either in this house or at the estate on the lake. She was buried in the family plot in Trinity Cemetery in Holderness. She has a small headstone with one name on it, Donna. There is a large spire-shaped monument in the center of the lot, the family's names on it and their relationships. The name of Woodbury, Langdon's second wife, is completely eliminated from the stone. There is nothing there to tell who she was or why she is buried there. This has puzzled me up to now because as she died around 1911, and he did not die until around 1927, he had plenty of time to have her name and relationship added to the family stone. Mr. Cushing thinks that, after her death, Mr. Langdon began to realize more and more what she was really like. He has the impression that Mr. Langdon was quite broke at the time of his death. I cannot trace any more of the previous owners, as I cannot trace the house back any further than around 1860. Mr. Langdon evidently bought and sold houses like other men bought and sold horses. If this is the house I believe it to be, it is on the road of Rumney and had to be moved in a backward position to where it is now. They had something like 6 months later to move the barn back. Then they had to put in a street going from the house up to the main road. They also had to put a fence up around the house. This property did have a barn, and there was a fence. There's a small piece of barn, and there was a fence here. There's a small piece of it left. The deeds from there just go around in circles. The man who I think the ghost is Mr. Woodbury Langdon. I have asked people around here what Mr. Langdon looked like, and they describe him very much as the man I saw in the bathroom. The man in the bicentennial book was his father. There's something in his face that was in the face of the ghost. I have 2 children. They are Kimberly Starr, age 9 years, and Rebecca Sue, age 6 years. Kim's birthday is on April 2nd, and Becky's is on August 10th. I was born and brought up on a farm 4.5 miles out of the country in the town of Plymouth. My father believes in spirits, sort of, but not really. My mother absolutely does not. I carried the business course and the college preparatory course through my 4 years of high school. I had 1 year of nurse's training. I was married when I was 20 in June, and Kim was born the next April. We also have a black cat who has acted queer at times in the past. He would go bounding up the stairs, only to come to an abrupt halt at the head of the stairs. He would sit there, staring at presumably empty space, and then take off as if he had never stopped. 2, sometimes he stood at the bathroom door and absolutely refused to go in. 3, he had spells of sitting in the hallway and staring up the stairs, not moving a muscle, and finally he would relax and go on his own. We finally settled on August 12th, a Saturday in 1967, to have a go at Mr. Langdon or whoever it was that haunted the house, since Miss Elliot was getting married in July and Mrs. Fuller wanted very much to be present. Eleanor Fuller greeted us as we arrived and led us into the house. As usual, Ethel began to sniff around, and I just followed her, tape recorder running and camera at the ready. We followed her up the stairs to the upper floor, where Ethel stopped at the bedroom on the right, which happened to be decorated in pink. I get an older woman wearing glasses, Ethel said cautiously, as she was beginning to pick up psychic leads, and a man wearing a funny hat. I pressed Ethel to be more specific about the funny hat and what period hat. The man seemed to her to belong to the early 1800s. She assured me it was not his century. She then complained about a cold spot, and when I stepped into it, I felt it. Since neither doors nor windows could be held responsible for the strong cold draft we felt, we knew that its origin was of psychic nature, as it often is when there are entities present. I asked Ethel to describe the woman she felt present. She is lying down, and I get a pain in the chest, she said, picking up the spirit's condition. The eyes are closed. We left the room and went farther on. Ethel grabbed her left shoulder as if in pain. She is here with me, looking at me, Ethel said. She's been here. Why is she still here? I asked. Got a sudden chill when you asked that, Ethel replied. She tells me to go left. I am having difficulty walking. I think this woman had that difficulty. We were walking down the stairs, then Ethel suddenly became a crone and had difficulty managing them. The real Ethel was as spry and fast as the chipmunks that used to roam around her house in Connecticut. I think she fell down these stairs, Ethel said, and began to cough. Obviously, she was being impressed by a very sick person. We had barely got Ethel to a chair when she slipped into a full trance and the transition took place. Her face became distorted as if in suffering, and a feeble voice tried to manifest through her, prodded by me to be clearer. Lander, or something, she mumbled. What followed was an absolutely frightening realization by an alien entity inside Ethel's body that the illness she was familiar with no longer existed now. At the same time, the excitement of this discovery made it difficult for the spirit to speak clearly, and we were confronted with a series of grunts and sighs. Finally, I managed to calm the entity down by insisting she needed to relax in order to be heard. Calm, calm, she said, and cried. Good. He knows. He did that. For 50 years. The woman. She had seized Mr. Fuller's hand so forcefully I felt embarrassed for her and tried to persuade the spirit within Ethel to let go, at the same time explaining her true condition to her gently but firmly. After I had explained how she was able to communicate with us and that the body of the medium was merely a temporary arrangement, the entity calmed down, asking only if he loved her, meaning the other spirit in the house. I assured her that this was so, and then called on Albert, Ethel's spirit guide, to help me ease the troubled one from Ethel's body and thus free her at the same time from the house. And then the man came into Ethel's body, very emotionally calling out Sylvia, the name of the woman she had seen earlier clairvoyantly. Again, I explained how he was able to communicate. You see me, don't you? He finally said as he calmed down. I loved everyone. I'll go. I won't bother you. I called again for Albert, and in a moment his crisp voice replaced the spirit's outcries. The man is a Henry McClellan. There stood in this vicinity another house around 1810, 1812 to 1820. A woman connected with this house lies buried here somewhere and is looking for her. His daughter, Maisie, about 1798, 16 or 18 years old, has been done wrong. Had to do with a feud of two families. McDurn? Albert then suggested letting the man speak to us directly, and so he did in a little while. I offered my help. "It is futile," he said. "My problem is my own." "Who are you?" "Henry. I lived right here. I was born here." "What year?" "What year are we in now as I speak with you?" "I speak to you in the year 1813. "Are you a gentleman or of some age?" "I would have been 47 years. "Do you serve in any governmental force or agency?" "My son, John Stuart McDermott?" "Your son was John Stuart McDermott? Where did he serve?" "Ticonderoga." And then he added, "My daughter, missing, but I found the bones, buried not too far from here. I am satisfied. I have her with me." He had admitted that he knew he was no longer on the earth plane, but was drawn to the place from time to time. "But if you ask me as a gentleman to go, I shall go," he added. "Under these circumstances, rare ones indeed, when dealing with hauntings, I suggested he not disturb those in the present house, especially the children. Also, would he not be happier in the world into which he had long passed?" "I shall consider that," he acknowledged. "You speak well, sir. I have no intention of frightening." "Are you aware that much time has passed? That this is not 1813 anymore?" "I am not aware of this, sir, but it is always the same time here." Again I asked if he served in any regiment, but he replied his leg was no good. "Was it his land and house?" "Yes," he replied. "He owned it and built the house, but when I pressed him as to where he might be buried, he balked." "My bones are here with me. I am sufficient unto myself." I then asked about his church affiliation, and he informed me his church was northeast of here on Beacon Road. The minister's name was Rooney, but he could not tell me the denomination. His head was not all it used to be. 150 years have passed," I said, and began the ritual of exorcism. "Go from this house in peace and with our love." And so he did. Albert, Ethel's guide, returned briefly to assure us that all was as it should be and Mr. McDermott was gone from the house. Also that he was being reunited with his mother, Sarah Ann McDermott. And then Albert too withdrew, and Ethel returned to her own self again. I turned to Mrs. Fuller and her cousin, Miss Elliot, for possible comments and corroboration of the information received through Mrs. Myers in trance. It appears the house that the Fullers were able to trace back as far as about 1860 was moved to make room for a road and then set down again not far from that road. Unfortunately, going further back proved difficult. I heard again from Mrs. Fuller in December of that year. The footsteps were continuing, it seemed, and her 7-year-old daughter Becky was being frightened by them. She had not yet been able to find any record of Mr. McDermott, but vowed to continue her search. That was some time ago, and nothing further turned up, and I really do not know if the footsteps continued or Mr. McDermott finally gave up his restless quest for a world of which he was no longer a part. As for Mr. Langdon, whom Ethel Myers had also identified by name as a presence in the house, he must by now be reunited with his wife Donna, and I hope he has forgiven her trespasses, or even her sins do not matter any longer. I was trying to explain that to my husband the other day. We were talking about our friend Brian who passed away. We just found out. I just found him on the internet about a day ago. I'm going to say like Thursday. possibly have been Friday, but I think, yeah, it was Thursday. And, he was hoping that he'd gotten over, his issues with his dad. And I'm like, a lot of that stuff doesn't go over to the other side. It's just love and happy and whatnot. Maybe you're going through a little swirly dirly to go back to the earthly realm, but yeah. So I've been liking this book so far. During the third hour, we generally hit Reddit and do ghost stories. We might continue on with this book. Just let me know what your thoughts are in the chat room. Anywho's, on that note, we are going to go to our second music break. On this break, we have Roy Washington's group, Prime Example, with My Inspiration. They're from the Milwaukee area. Then we have the lovely and talented Miss Michaelin Hay with Gravity, Mirror, and Pins and Needles. And then we have Mr. Fred Johnson III with After Dark. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this music break.
When you smile, I see the life in your eyes. I hear the rhythm of you, creating moments we chill to. Wrapped in the waves of emotion, it's imperative. We're making love to your mind. It's like the feel of your thighs on my back when I'm deep in consummation with you in the room. It's like the scent of your breath in my face when we touch and share the rhythm of a loving embrace. Yeah. It's your smile that lets me know I'm on point, that I have rewritten the word in this joint, and it's you. Pretty brown eyes and confidence, you're my ministry, and girl, I'm feeling it. Come on, so smile for me, and don't let my hand go, girl. I just want you to know when I'm sending my love to you in verse 2 with a kiss and a beat that you and I can step to. Come on, God created the heavens and the earth. What he said is very best for the day of your birth. No longer is it just me, myself, and I, but since you have arrived, you're the apple of my eye, girl. Open your heart and let me come inside. All this love is forever for the ride. And when that DJ played our favorite song, we dance the night away until we're heading home where we're
Signs, a leave behind. silent, drifting all alone, killing time and counting stars, waiting for the moment we get. I feel you pull me closer, you got me burning up, you got a hold on me. I feel you pull me closer, you got me burning up, your mind, my gravity. I feel you pull me closer, you got me burning up, you got a hold on me. I feel you pull me closer, you got me burning up, your mind, my gravity. I dove right in, didn't bring a parachute, fell right through, hit the water hard, moving too fast, spiraling out of control, was touch and go, went a little far. You taught me how to turn a blind eye. I showed you how to keep a shoulder cold. No one walked away without a scar. I've been digging through the pieces. Your heart is out of reach, but objects may seem nearer through this rippled mirror. I've been digging through the pieces. Your heart is out of reach, but objects may seem nearer through this rippled mirror. Try to erase the ink that's left upon my chest. I'll attest, I don't really wanna forget to forget. You taught me how to turn a blind eye. I showed you how to keep a shoulder cold. No one walked away without a scar. I've been digging through the pieces. Your heart is out of reach, but objects may seem nearer through this rippled mirror. I've been digging through the pieces. Your heart is out of reach, but objects may seem nearer through this rippled mirror. You taught me how to turn a blind eye. I showed you how to keep a shoulder cold. No one walked away without a scar. I've been digging through the pieces. Your heart is out of reach, but objects may seem nearer through this rippled mirror. I've been digging through the pieces. Your heart is out of reach, but objects may seem nearer through this rippled mirror. Talking on pins and needles, every word through a microscope. You keep stomping down on the ground while I've been stuck on this tightrope. I just wanna say what I wanna say without your sentence. I'm not willing to do the time when I'm innocent, and I'm innocent. Talking on pins and needles. Talking on pins and needles. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang your blowtorch at my feet. You won't ever see me beg, so take this tongue off your leash. I'm gonna say what I wanna say, don't need permission. Interpret it how you want, it's my decision. Talking on pins and needles. Talking on pins and needles. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. Dancing on shattered glass, kicking the pieces all around. My safety has been broken, this is now a hunting ground. Talking on pins and needles. Talking on pins and needles. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. I'm gonna hang it up, I'm gonna hang it up, I'm gonna hang it up, up, up. Talking about I'm gonna hang it up, I'm gonna hang it up, I'm gonna hang it up, up, up. Talking about I'm gonna hang it up, I'm gonna hang it up, I'm gonna hang it up, up, up. Talking about I'm gonna hang it up, I'm gonna hang it up, I'm gonna hang it up, 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 up.
My driver pulls up in my limousine, ready to take me anywhere I want to be. I say, I want to go. Take me to a college scene. I'd like to go and dance, have drinks, and hunt the perfect day. Yeah. Living at the dark, I search lonely streets to find hidden shadows in the dark. It doesn't matter what I say. Secret homicides arranged in a series of pursuits. No matter what I say, after dark. I gave her base because she had the range. I knew she was the one that never could go home again. Plastic light by limo seats. I don't know why I can't control this urge to hurt again. Yeah. Living at the dark, I search lonely streets to find
Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining us this evening on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. This evening, we are doing story time with me, TessaTNT, and thus far, we have finished The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and then we began a new book and got through that first section of Real Hauntings, True American Ghost Stories. For our third hour, we're going to head on over to Reddit and we're going to read us some ghost stories. Hope you guys are buckled down tight, holding on loosely, huddled up next to the fire with your favorite fuzzy blanket, and drinking your favorite cocktail, or smoking your favorite bone, or whatever may be the case. So this one is on Reddit Ghost Stories, user A_shadows_flame. This is a true story that some of you might not believe, but I, a 14-year-old female, have a ghost named Catherine. She is an interesting spirit that has told me a lot of stuff about herself. Now, before anyone asks about the home I live in a newish home around 14 years old, first owner. My house is on Indian farmlands. When I told my dad about Catherine, he said I was crazy and that no one died on this land. It was farmland before the house was built. I first started seeing her in December 2021. I was on a call with my ex-boyfriend, and Catherine started to crawl out of my closet like the weirdo she is, and I started to cry. My ex tried to console me as best he could, but it took about 30 minutes just for her to go back in my closet. Catherine is not a poltergeist. She can talk to me and make herself visible. To describe Catherine, she's 25 years old. She's pretty tall and nice, but a mean type of girl. When I first started seeing her, she told me she wanted to kill me. Lucky for you, Catherine, you haven't yet. Okay, but she told me about 6 months ago, but slowly she started warming up to me. She told me she had a boyfriend in the afterlife, and she is pansexual. She loves playing games and stuff, and can be affectionate at times, but can be very hostile. She's comforted me before. Thanks for reading. This one is by user/Gypsy_danger. Don't open that door. Here's a little background context. So this past Thanksgiving was hard for my family. It was the first Thanksgiving without my biological grandmother. I called her Nana. Her life partner, my other grandmother, who I called Nain. So now that I got that out of the way. So on Thanksgiving night, me and Nain and my half-brother were sitting in the living room reminiscing on past Thanksgivings we spent with Nana when we heard something fall in the master bedroom. Nain closed the door to keep the dogs out of there so no one and nothing was in there. We brushed it off and decided to put on a movie, and were watching it when we heard voices coming from the room. We paused the movie to listen, but couldn't quite make out what they were saying. We assumed it was just the neighbors, and were about to continue the movie when we heard a voice call out of Nain in my Nana's voice, only it wasn't her. We all knew it. Again, she called out, this time for me. This time, the tone in her voice was urgent, like she was hurting. Help me! We heard her cry. My brother, who's never really encountered or cared for the supernatural, was shaking. He tried to get up when Nain shouted, something she's never done. Don't open that door! Again, we heard my Nana crying while pounding on the door. When, at 11:52 p.m., it was quiet. That was the time she died. Till this day, we haven't spoken of what happened. Nain had me sage the entire house the next day. This is by you/hopeful act 7319. The Hat Man. I've been reading through these stories and some of them stood out. It isn't until all these years later, I'm 29, and it clicked on what I saw. Backstory: I've had experiences since I was young. Very vivid dreams, immense feelings of what others are going through, psychic abilities, etc. Found out recently I'm an empath after thinking something was wrong with me. I have a twin sister whom isn't an empath but has seen these things as well. And that townhouse was haunted, or those energies are attracted to us. I've heard twins are different than just the surface. We were trying to sleep. We had bunk beds, but slept on the bottom because we're inseparable, to laugh out loud. I lie there in the dark, ready to doze off, when I see a figure peeking into my door, slightly. I stared in fear. I remember the sweating from anxiety till this day. He just stood there looking in. My sister saw it too, but we said nothing to each other. I blanked out, as I don't remember what happened afterwards. When I've told this story in the past, I referenced this figure to Freddy Krueger. He had a brim hat, dressed in all black. It was until reading you guys' experiences that I know exactly what I saw in 2004. Thank you all. There's a little comment down below from cute_salamander_1459. He often stood over my bed when I went on special trips with my dad's stepdad. I was so desperate to get away from the man who forced me to share a bed with him that I scrambled to grab onto the Hat Man before he just poofed and I fell off the end of the bed while sobbing quietly. Ew, that doesn't sound very good. Poor guy. Poor feller. This one is by you/Barbasalish. I am here. Here's a story about me questioning my insanity or sanity after becoming a mother for the first time. Fall 2020, our first child was born. From the beginning, she was very agile, could hold her head up only after a few weeks, always moving and determined to learn something new. One of the first times she rolled over by herself on our couch, me sitting in front of her, I applauded and cheered. And right next to me, I heard a man cheer with me, like he was standing next to us in the living room. It was a loud, deep voice. No real words, just joyful gibberish. We were alone. Our little family moved to my hometown, into my grandparents' old home in spring 2021. We had to renovate a few rooms, left our furniture temporarily at the old place, and slept in the huge old bed my grandpa left for us in his house. One night, my boyfriend was still working on the floor in the dining room. He wanted to finish his work, and I decided to go to bed with our daughter. I laid her down, sleeping in the middle of the huge bed, surrounded her by pillows, so she couldn't fall out, and went quick to the bathroom next door. In the middle of brushing my teeth, I heard the deep voice again. This time he sounds angry, very loud, almost intimidating. I dropped everything and rushed to the bedroom. My daughter was awake and somehow rolled herself to the edge of the bed. She never did that before. This situation taught me to expect everything at any time. I was there just in time to prevent her from falling. I called my boyfriend, asked him if he had said anything or called me, but he denied it. I didn't know how to feel at this point. A few months later, on our daughter's first birthday, we had an accident and needed to go to the hospital. I will not go into detail, but I can say that I thought her head would be injured, but there was almost nothing. It's like someone put his hands over her head in just the perfect moment. I heard him one more time shortly after the accident in a calm, clear voice. He told me, "I am here." I believe he wants nothing but the best for our daughter. My boyfriend has a difficult relationship with his father's side of the family. I kind of forced him at least to send a letter to his grandparents that we were expecting a child when I was pregnant. 3 months before our daughter was born, his grandfather died of cancer and no one told us. We found it out 2 days after our child was born. I have the feeling I know who her guardian angel might be. This one is by u/Master Bedroom Ghost. Should I move in to my cousin's haunted house? Voted to see. So, I have experienced a lot of things normal yet, but I'm kind of being forced into putting myself into a position that I will end up experiencing it. So, the apartment building I'm living in had to be evacuated due to structural issues found that had been caused by a hurricane we had a few months back. Basically, the whole building had kind of... they had to find repairs. Living well repairs are being done. Due to this being caused by an act of nature, our landlord is not required to help us. I'm temporarily staying with a friend, but it's only for a few days. I'm currently looking for a long-term temporary place to stay, but my options are limited because I don't have many family members here. My parents are in assisted living community that doesn't allow long-time guests, and my siblings live in other states. I need to stay here for work. The few friends that I do have all already live in multiple people housing hold, and there is just not room. The only one of new who had room was of my cousins. We will call him Sam. Sam and his husband own a farmhouse not too far out of town limits and would only be about 30 to 40 minutes for commute to work, so I called him to ask if he'd be okay with me staying there. That's when he started acting weird. This was some of the phone conversations. Him, I don't think you want to stay here. Me, why? Him, okay, I'm going to tell you something, and you can't laugh because it's really not funny. Me, what? Him, this place is haunted. Me, Sam, come on. Him, I am being serious. It's haunted. Well, actually, it's just the master bedroom. Me, why do you think that? He goes on to explain that less than a week after moving in, weird things started happening, but only in his master bedroom. Pretty much basically haunted house stuff, moving objects, slamming doors and cabinets, and lights turning on and off. The scariest thing was that at night, there would be someone knocking on the closet door from the inside. A loud knock that would last for a while. He even sent me a video of it. No, I will not be sharing it, as it's not my video to share. This freaks them out, and only a few months after moving in, they decided they couldn't sleep in that room anymore. Now, the house had 2 rooms when they moved in, a smaller room that felt more like a small office, and the master bedroom where the knocking happens. Because of the weird stuff that went on down in that room, Sam and his husband actually built another bedroom onto their house on the completely opposite side of the house and slept in the small office room while it was being built. Now, the thing is, I'm a pretty big skeptic when it comes to ghost stuff, but the fact they actually built a whole new room makes me think there is something to their story. Also, I know Sam, and he is not the kind of guy to make this stuff up. After he informed me of the happenings, he said, I am free to stay, but that I have to stay in the small room as the old master room is now locked and nobody is allowed inside. He explained that after moving out, they started hearing the knock on the other side of the bedroom door rather than the closet room, at which point they decided to permanently lock the door. He said if that happens, to just ignore it. So basically, I am free to stay with them, but apparently I have another roommate who may or may not be an evil spirit. As a skeptic, it actually says septic here, but I know what they're saying. I wanted some advice from believers, so what do you think? I move in. I kind of don't have a choice though. And then it says edited. So someone just sent me this link. Apparently someone took this post and posted it on AML. Am I the asshole after editing to make me look like a grade A bitch? Even going as far as copying my username. I want to make it clear, this is not me. What a douchebag. Someone said below, this might sound unrealistic. Long story, ghost? Old manor house in the UK turned school. Problem was, most students and staff were just fine with it, so I asked, what if I'm not fine, cause this is freaking me the hell out? Someone said, talk to it, respectfully. Tell the ghost you mean no harm. Please, maybe leave me alone. Felt like an idiot, rambled out loud in my room for a while. It did stop bugging me, although the usual footsteps and noises no one else seemed to mind could still be heard most nights. Told you, sounds weird. Duchess of Marin said, if Sam has the haunted room closed off and you won't be staying in it, no problem. Tell Sam to sprinkle salt around the door to the closed off room. Tex U. Kane said, get permission from your cousin to share the video so we can evaluate the possible and possibly debunk it, which to set your mind at ease. As for whether you should move in or not, I think the answer is pretty obviously yes. I mean, what are your options if you don't? Also, if you're in the States, there are programs that will help you find and pay for accommodations when you're displaced like this, especially if the damage was caused by a storm. Personally, I'd be online and or on the phone nonstop, getting signed up, every bit of assistance I could, but absolutely loathe living in someone else's house and recognize that not everybody would be as bothered about that as I would be. MapTuff said, take the offer. Don't disrespect host's kindness and don't disrespect the ghosts. Don't go near the room. Now they're kind of getting into a little argument on there. People take things so personally. This one is by u/DOCMLZ. How I Met Uncle Bobby. When I was 14 in 1994, my bedroom was in the attic of a 100-year-old house. My 7-year-old sister and parents had bedrooms on the second floor, and the main floor was mostly open with a cute 40s-style kitchen. Oh, how cute. One day, I was in my room when one of the kids visiting the second floor had accidentally made his way up into my room. He was quiet and just looked at me. This happened often, so I directed him back downstairs to the second floor. An hour or so later, I walked downstairs to talk to my mom and casually asked where the kids went. She seemed confused and said that my sister wasn't home today and no kids were visiting. I walked up and down the stairs a few times, checked all the closets, and figured the kid must have left. Mom assured me she's been sitting between the only two doors of the house and no kids visited. I was sure I saw a kid, but it would have been hard to sneak around her twice, especially with the loud screen doors. That night before dinner, I'm skimming through the local paper. Every day, they would publish anniversaries of local stories from 5, 10, 20, 50, and 100 years ago. When I got the story about 50 years ago, it told a story about a kid who died when a bomb got loose from the WW2 armory across the street and accidentally detonated in our kitchen. I look around and notice how our kitchen is from the 40s. Then I remember how I saw this kid earlier in the day and it freaked me out. Was he a ghost kid? Even without the ghost kid, it's a weird story, but what if he was a ghost kid? We moved away from that house, and I always wondered about the ghost kid. So here's where it gets really weird. When I moved in with a roommate 5 years ago, we're telling stories back and forth one night and eventually get around to ghost stories, and I tell him about the ghost kid. He says, "Was it at 44 Front Ave East?" Yeah. He didn't know me then. This is weird. That's my Uncle Bobby. He hit it with an ice pick. What does he mean he hit it with an ice pick? What does that mean? So confused. This one is by the same person, you, Barbara Salish. Dreamcatcher. As a kid, I lived with my mom in an old house divided in 4 apartments. We lived on the first floor of the house and was near a mortuary. All the time that we lived there, which was 20 years, my mom and I had many strange encounters with someone or something. Today, I want to start telling my stories and begin with the one that may not be the scariest but gives me headaches till today. I had a canopy bed as a child. My grandpa built it when I was very little, 4, maybe 5. As a teenage girl, I once went to the dollar store and found a unique dream catcher that fit perfectly between the curtains of my canopy bed. The dream catcher had a star macrame in dark purple and instead of feathers, some kind of wind chime under the macrame part. It was very pretty, and I loved the dingling sound every time I got out or into bed. One day, when I came home and went to my room, I noticed immediately that my dream catcher was gone. Only the ring and a piece of purple fabric hung between the curtains. The rest of my dream catcher was in pieces everywhere on my bed and in the room. The chime part was ripped apart and the macrame was completely torn. It looked like a cat had a very good time with it, but we didn't own a cat. It felt like a crime scene to me and gave me chills. Later that day, I did some research on the star pattern of the macrame only to find out that the star symbol is meant to drive out dark spirits. Maybe this dream catcher saved me or someone else in my house in a way I never noticed. I still have no other explanation for this experience. I'd love to hear similar stories. Sorry about the bad English. This one is by u/MMM Liam. Grimesfield, Hillsborough, New Hampshire, 2015. Never saw anything like it again, have been down path several times since. Me and my uncle pulled in at 11:45 one night in October and parked next to the gate in the smaller baseball field by the river and started walking towards the main path. Backstory on this goes quick. As far as I know, he would check on the graves back in the 1800s at the mini graveyard that we are all now walking in the opposite direction of because we saw this lantern from deep in the woods driving in. And then he died. So as we're walking towards the path, in between two trees at the beginning, he is standing there, an outline of a human being. Divine orange light covered his entire body. No more lantern. My uncle kind of left me in the dust running away. I was awestruck and looked for as long as I could until the fear washed over me, and he started walking toward me, and I immediately ran to the car, and my uncle took the long way out, and as we left, I saw him in the rearview mirror. Also, as we left, two women with strollers were walking into the park, and I asked my uncle if we should warn them, and he shouted no. I always was puzzled by that, but now start to wonder if there was a trap or ghost as well, because it was nearly 12 at that point. I want to know if anybody's seen anything like this, because I cannot really explain this to people. CEOOF6 says, I have not experienced stuff like this, but have heard that they will often use someone who seems harmless like women with babies in the scenario to lure you into feeling like you're not in danger and let your guard down. This story is by u/open-strategy-2558. Ghost Runner. I'm usually a skeptic when it comes to ghosts, but since living in a 100-year-old house, things have gotten pretty weird. I've gotten used to the bumps and shadows, but one night, things got super spooky. My wife was sleeping, and I was laying in bed in the dark reading a book on my phone. Suddenly, the dogs began barking, and I hear a series of hard thuds against the floor, as if someone was walking down the hall with work boots on. My wife must have heard it too because she lifted her head and asked what it was. We fell silent again. It sounded as if someone took 3 slow steps down the hall. For a little context, at the end of the hall is a small built-in utility room that leads out to the backyard. We quickly began thinking that maybe someone had come in from the back door. The dogs were still alert when my wife asked me to pass her pistol, and as she got up to assess the situation, it sounded like somebody started charging down the hall towards the room. Scared the shit out of all of us. My wife ran out of the room with the dogs ready to shoot first and ask questions later, but there was no one there. Not a soul. For even more context, before we rented this house, my mom rented it, and when I told her about what happened, she said that the same things happened to her. She heard running down the hall in the middle of the night and stood by her bedroom door with a crowbar, only for no one to appear. Occasionally, I still hear heavy footsteps, but I ignore them now. Too bad I can't ignore when they whisper in my ear. Ooh, this one, Nikes Don't Care said, what kind of things get whispered into your ear? OMG, that's scary AF. Just the occasional hey or hey girl, but in a deep man voice. Is the ghost of Barry White. Someone said, that's crazy, you should set up a camera. Open Strategy says, I've thought about it, but too scared to catch anything. We have one in the living room and it's always radio silence in there. We also have Ring and constantly see orbs moving around the porch. The whole neighborhood is historic, with a plantation house around the corner from us, so it's not surprising, but that night we definitely laid awake longer than usual. Pretty intriguing story. Good job there, Mr. Ghost Runner. This one is by u/the hippo. My spirit friend. I'm not spiritual, but spirits have always been my friends. In the best of times and in the worst of times. Spirits have accompanied me when I'm down and out, or when I celebrated my firstborn. While others smell sulfur, my nostrils are so tuned to the sweet aroma that I believe in all my heart is the nectar that powers the soul. Some fear it, others wanted exorcised from their lives, but I welcome them with open arms. They often feel like long-lost friends, distant but familiar. So here's to you, Jack, my familiar friend. Here's to another year for giving me glimpses of what heaven feels like. As the countdown to my death approaches with every living second, I have you, Jack, to comfort me, to hold me, and to accompany me to whatever lays ahead of me. Thank you, my spirit friend. This one is by u/no selection 5573. My paranormal experience. I am an 11-year-old male at the time was on my way to school one Monday morning, and to get to my school, you would have to go through 2 tunnels between houses. I had exited the first tunnel and turned to walk to the second, around 4 houses away, when a feeling of unease and anxiety breezed onto me. Before I could even react, I heard the sudden noise that nobody ever wants to hear by themselves. I heard a baby crying. So what do? I turn around and check. The baby was fine and was left in a stroller. After giving it one of my Milo bars and a quick look around, I placed it back in the stroller, closed the top, and walked away. A horrible decision, I know, but I was 11. Not even 2 houses away, I turned around to check and it was gone. I sped up to the second tunnel before seeing the baby stroller in the middle with a sign saying, "Turn around." That's where the story gets fuzzy. I wrote it down somewhere. If you want, I can update with the rest. So Truth Seeker 1982 is saying, I'm not understanding the story at all. Maybe a translation issue with language? Maybe try again, but with the full story. Now I'm curious. It's like a horror movie. Could we get more of what happened? Seriously, I need to know more. Update. Definitely need more. I'm curious. Everybody's saying they need an update. They want to know more. This one is by u/consistent-AD7619. It's 6 a.m. and I'm bored. Here is a story. This story has been in my head for a while, but it has also been over 5 years since this has happened. I will try my best to type this out. It was 2015, and I was 12 years old in a suburban town in Pennsylvania. I lived on top of a cliff/hill. This part comes in later. And my neighbor at the time, we will call her A, was 11 and a grade under me. Now, I was never really close to my family, so I never really knew the pain of losing a daily member at this point, but my neighbor had lost her grandmother at this point in time. She spent a couple days with her family, and when she came home, she was still a mess. I, doing the only thing I knew how to do when people were upset, found her as soon as she came home and hugged her. After this, we hung out all the time and decided we wanted to hang out all night because why not? Her brother was staying at his other friend's house as his own coping mechanism, so we took over his bedroom with his permission because he had a queen bed and so we could share a bed. I'll skip over all the tween girl shit, but we did because it's not important. Where the weird shit is at around 12 a.m., we ended our night watching South Park on her laptop. I fell asleep during the last episode we were watching. I finished the episode and put her laptop on the floor and turned over to go to sleep. Now this is where this really gets hard to explain, so I'm going to write what happened and list order of times. 12 a.m. I finished watching the South Park episode and went to sleep. 12:30 a.m. A stirs quite hard in bed. 1 to 1:15 a.m. A stirs concerningly hard in her sleep to the point where I make sure she's okay and also start to make weird noises. Like when a baby tried to learn to talk for the first time but just couldn't figure out how to make out the words. 1:30 a.m. A stirs so hard in her sleep she ends up laying with her head at my feet and her feet at my head, and she's doing the weird mumble growl thing even louder, and it really doesn't sound like her. 2 a.m. She continues stirring and making weird noises. 2:30 a.m. She starts making the noises again and stirs more and more. She eventually sat up in bed and sat up completely straight, turning her head out towards the front of the bed. Her shoulders completely relax and she says, "But I didn't mean to," in a tone that makes it sound like she was getting scolded. She lays down while swinging her legs completely straight out and laying down perfectly as if someone was placing down a doll. I, freaking the fuck out, turned to look to see what she was looking at. When I turned, I saw a figure of a woman that was just pure white. I didn't get a long enough look to be able to make out features, but I saw something. Now, this figure thing was not in front of a window or a mirror or any sort of light. The street lamps were not LEDs at this point, and they were actually a yellowish color. I also only go to see this figure for about half a second. 2:37 a.m. Yes, I know the exact time. I pack my shit up and I go home. As I'm going home, I feel like I'm being stared at from all corners behind me and in front of me as I walk on the road. I kept checking behind me, and obviously there was nothing to the eye I felt like there was. The house I lived in had a concrete slab walkway thing that led up to the front door. So as I'm walking out of this walkway, I hear what sounds like heavy boots walking behind me. I remember pausing and trying to let my brain figure out if it was my steps or something else. As I walked faster, so did the sounds of the steps behind me. Once I got to my door, they stopped. The next day, I told my neighbor about this, and there was no explanation for this experience. My family and hers told me that I saw nothing. What I heard was her simply sleep-talking, even though she had no prior experience with it, and also that her stirring was just normal. About a few weeks after this happened, I spoke about it to A again, and her exact sentence to bringing it up again was, "Oh yeah, it was my grandma. She visits me in my sleep now." Now that is kind of explained. Let's get back to the feeling of being watched while crossing the road. This is also where the cliff I live on comes in. Now, if there are people who don't know, Pennsylvania is the state of coal, and there's a lot of coal mining, obviously. After the whole seeing my friend's dead grandma ordeal, we were sitting around the fire talking about why our parents decided to live where we lived. So we simply asked them, and one thing that really sticks out in the conversation is the risk factor of living where we lived. Underneath all those houses is old mining tunnels that could collapse at any minute. There's not a lot of information on the story, but I'm pretty sure something happens and there was an accident or people got sick, but something happened. and it was not good. So that could feeling of being watched while walking, maybe there was just someone making sure I got home safe. I've never had an experience like that ever since that moment. I am now 18 and still can't make sense of the situation, and also no longer talk to A. It is like a weird enclosed chapter of my life. This one is by U/Black Widow, which is BLCKWDW21, 283 East Broadway. When I was a kid, about 6 or 7, my mom moved us into an apartment which had been an old home converted into apartments. The house was about 3 homes down the street from a mortuary in which there was a wayward cemetery behind it. That's another story. So when we first moved in, I think everything was fine, but eventually my mom's bedroom door would swing open and slam shut and repeat. My mom told me that it was something wrong with the hinges of the door which caused it to do that, but my gut always told me different. Some days it would open and shut here and there, but there were some nights it would go wild. Fast forward, I didn't want to sleep in my room because I always say the silhouette of a person in my doorway was just looking at me. I would be literally frozen. One specific thing that happened to me that I know for sure I will never forget is the one day my grandmother was babysitting me and she told me not to run in the house. She left me inside to go sit in the porch, so I decided to fill my water gun and join her. I went in the kitchen, which, if you can picture, there was a straight shot from the back of the apartment to the front door with no obstructions. A sprinter's dream. The setup went like this, starting at the back of the apartment. 1, kitchen. 2, dining room. Living room / door, just wide open space. I filled my water gun, took off full speed. As soon as I hit the living room, I was pushed and held down. I screamed, but nothing would come out. It felt like I was glued to the floor for hours. I couldn't hear anything. I couldn't move. Nothing. It felt like sleep paralysis, except I was fully awake. I honestly don't know how long I was on the floor, but 1 minute sound didn't exist, and the next it was like someone turned the volume of the universe to the max as my grandma walked in the door. The look I gave her had to be wild because I was so confused. I asked her if she heard me screaming, and she looked at me like I was crazy and said no. I ended up telling her what happened to me, and she sternly told me not to run around in that apartment. That night, when my mom got home from work, I heard her mentioning how, that man killed his wife and hung himself in your bedroom doorway, and that's why it keeps opening up now. She's feeling and seeing things. My mom began getting me to sleep with her on the couch. Our neighbor said that one time she locked her front door, which was a chain lock, deadbolt, and bottom lock. It was midday, and she went to take a shower. When she got out, the front door was wide open. I still tried to research the home and overall area, but I always come up empty. This happened in Salem, New Jersey. Well, on that note, boys and girls, that is the end of our time together this evening. I just want to thank you so much for joining me for story time with me, TessaTNT, on Late Night in the Rockies. It was a pleasure having you all here and having you listening ears listening to all of these amazing stories. I also want to thank all of our friends on We Are Paradox Media's Facebook, KPNL Radio, Twitter, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, and wherever else you may be listening beyond the Omniverse tonight. I had a wonderful time, and I can't wait to do it again next weekend. We have Mr. Psychic Chris Garcia on Saturday, and then we have Memphis Empath Paranormal on Sunday. It's going to be awesome. You guys don't forget, we are all in this together. Together, we can make the world a little better. And together, my friends, we are Paradox Media, because without you, there is no us. Until next time, nighty-night, love and light. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your weekend and you don't work too hard. And I will see you back here, same time, same crazy place. Be good to yourself.